Wednesday evening, time for Light 'em Up. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome at the Light 'em Up Lounge. It's Wednesday. What can I say? Time for a great cigar, time for a great conversation, and time to welcome back a wonderful lady of the industry that we haven't had on the show for quite a while. And we were just discussing before we went live how thankfully Laurel and I we ran into each other again at this year's trade show in Vegas, and boom, there it was, show scheduled, and here we are, a couple of weeks and months later, back live with the one and only Laurel Tilley joining us from icy cold. Whereabouts, actually, Laurel? Where are you joining?
Nashville on a
Oh,
very
very
blustery day in Nashville.
lovely. It's good to have you back, Laurel. Thank you so much for taking the time and joining us today. It's always
No, it's
wonderful to see you. Always great to have you.
so great to be back. And I know I felt so bad when we connected at PCA and you're like, well, how about this week? I'm like, well, I can't do this week. How about that week? You're like, well, and then all of a sudden, weeks turn into months. We're like, okay, Thanksgiving, that is when we're doing this.
It's all good. We're here. We managed, and in fact, yes, tomorrow is Thanksgiving. I know it's a huge holiday, and it's a big week for all our friends and family in the US. So thanks to everybody who's still taking the time despite the busy preparations. I was just on the phone with George Brightman a bit before we went on the show, and he was busy like preparing the whole feast and everything. So I know a lot of you folks are probably in the same shoes, but I appreciate you all taking the time regardless. If you're joining us over on Facebook, please make yourselves heard in the comments. Put all your questions underneath the live stream. I'll be delighted and honored to forward them to Laurel, and we're happy to discuss them here on the show. For everybody joining us here on Zoom, live at the lounge, it's great to have you, friends and family. Good to see a couple of familiar faces and a few people that I haven't seen in a while. It's always a privilege to have you. It's crazy how time flies, really. Like we're getting towards the rear end of 2023 here, and it just seems like where have all these weeks and months gone, and everybody's busy preparing for the holidays, and it kind of feels like we're in 2024 mood already. And I'm sure, Laurel, you've experienced the same, because things have become quite condensed for the industry with the change of dates for PCA.
Oh yeah.
Just as soon as we wrapped things up in Vegas, really everybody was already scrambling and preparing for the next trade show in March, which is literally just around the corner. But you've kept yourself busy over the last months, particularly in your not so new anymore role with AJ Fernandez. The last time we spoke here on the show, live at the lounge, you were still with your previous employer, taking care of Macanudo, and now serving as the brand development manager for AJ Fernandez. So plenty to talk about there and plenty to catch up on. But again, thanks for taking the time and welcome to Light 'em Up.
No, this is great. I mean, and you were talking about how time goes by so quickly. It's honestly bonkers, not to get existential, but when I was a kid, my mom, I would always be like, oh, I can't wait till I'm, this age to do this or and she was like, do not rush time. She's like, as you get older, time slips away so much faster. And I feel like every year I feel like I constantly am saying, oh my gosh, it's the end of the summer. Oh my gosh, it's Thanksgiving. Oh my gosh, it's, the new year. And yeah, it's just, in some respects, it feels like, with AJ, I've been here for longer. We have the benefit of being, a smaller, more tight knit company. So I feel like, early on I got, ingratiated pretty quickly, but then it's just, yeah, so it's great. But yeah, it has been going by very quickly. So this year has been fun, got to work with all the reps and kind of go about and see how AJ's doing in the territory and, get some feedback from retailers, kind of figure out, just the general reception of the brand. I mean, AJ he has solidified himself in the industry as being this, really amazing, prolific blender. and it's cool to be kind of on this side of it because, you know, coming from first as a consumer and then second, like you said, you know, my previous company I was working for with Macanudo, you know, you see AJ from an outside perspective and you're like, oh man, like this brand is so cool and it's, you know, it's growing so quickly, and, you know, kind of now being able to be on the inside looking outward and, you know, being part of that trajectory has been very cool.
Well, how tell us a little bit about such a transition. We see it every now and then that people who have a great track record like yourself in the industry change their position or work for a different company, and it's like wearing different hats. Suddenly you're representing a different company, a different legacy, and even a different style of cigars and experience. How did that change come about for you in the first place, and what made it easy for you to make that switch and start the journey all over again with AJ Fernandez?
You know, you always ask very good questions. I remember the first time I did an interview with you, it's like, no, you know, you really ask like very thorough, thoughtful questions. So that's awesome. Thank you. Um, you
Thank
know,
you.
it's it was a decision that, you know, came down to basically, you know, me just needing more of an opportunity to grow, you know, both personally and professionally. And I had, you know, AJ had been on my radar, you know, since 2011 when I started working in cigar retail. In fact, that was really the year that he started ramping up his own line, you know, versus doing, you know, e-commerce or collaboration solely for other people and then starting his own company. So it's just kind of funny how the, you know, the timelines match up like that. You know, that's when San Latano was really coming into the stores. But, you know, and then with STG, we did a lot of collaborations with AJ. And so again, he was on my radar in that regard. And, you know, I'm a lover of cigars first and foremost. You know, obviously I always want to be loyal to the brand that I'm working with, but at the end of the day, I'm a cigar smoker and I enjoy something that, you know, is appealing to me. And the AJ portfolio and, you know, for my palate has always, you know, hit really, really well. Um, and so when I was kind of starting to look, you know, to kind of make a change, there were, you know, companies in my mind where, you know, if there was an opportunity, I could say to myself, oh, you know, I would love to work for them versus, you know, some companies might objectively be good, but, you know, for me, that fits my own palate, my own personality, maybe just might not be the right fit. And honestly, it just, you know, the timing worked out really well. And it was a great opportunity to work for a company who I feel like puts out really amazing, consistent products. And, you know, to kind of be on this end of, you know, a company that continues to grow at the rate we are, just it was really fun and appealing, and I felt like I could bring some of my personality to that to some degree. So yeah, it's been good, but it was hard, of course. You know, you have friends and you know, you get comfortable and you get used to something, so, you know, having to make that change. But I think if you look at anyone in the industry, we've all been, you know, more than one place, whether it be retail or one manufacturer to another. I feel like as you start to put in the years, it's only natural to kind of move around. And what I love about the industry is that it's so accepting because, you know, I had so much support from my former colleagues, you know, even my former company, they were really chill, which I appreciate. And, you know, you're still seeing those people. And I think just the support, not only from, you know, the manufacturer side, but the consumer and the retail side. I mean, you know, at PCA, there were so many of these people that I haven't seen since I made the switch. And they're like, oh, Laurel, we're so happy for you. Like, oh, it's so great. And, you know, just the overwhelming support kind of from every aspect is, I think, really what even keeps me in the cigar industry for as long as I have been.
Yeah. Lauren, you mentioned a wonderful point, and that is to make a contribution and to give your all in order to help a company or a brand take a next step and grow. So it's not just your personal aspirations and your journey as a professional, but also the contribution that you can make to somebody else's livelihood and their brand and their company. Obviously, AJ, the whole company and Abdal as a person, they've been rising stars of the industry. And even at a comparatively young age, Abdel has, you know, been awarded many, many times over and became one of the true icons of the industry. How did you feel that you could make a difference? And what was the impact you were hoping to have on the brand when you decided to join the company and give it your all there?
Another great question. The way that I felt that I could have an impact, kind of first and foremost was just somebody, being around and, I joke like spreading the good word of AJ Fernandez. We have our sales team out on the streets. We have a sales force here in the US. And of course we have, Stephen in our international market. But having somebody to, go and connect with the retailers and, do events and do trainings, like I'm really big on like trainings and educational things, as a retailer. And I know that not everybody operates the same way that I do, but as a retailer, I always appreciated when somebody would come in and really give me like a comprehensive rundown of the brand and to help me understand it better, because I feel more comfortable selling when I feel connected to a brand. So I guess to, sum it up, I felt like I could help make a connection with consumers and retailers to sort of bring them back to the brand, consistently showing up to retail shops with the reps, doing these trainings, doing events, doing things like this, podcasts, videos, social media, just to sort of bring, not that people aren't aware of it, but just to, another arm of getting people to think about the brand. And, for us, Abdel does a lot of, he's done a lot of work with other manufacturers and collaborations, and we have our own products as well, which are the AJ Fernandez portfolio. So, what I'm smoking right now is the Diaz de Gloria. You're smoking the New World Dorado. Those both fall within portfolio. And I think there's sort of this, I know, and our company knows that there's this sort of disconnect. Like people, they know the AJ name, but sometimes they don't always associate that with the AJ Fernandez portfolio and our own brands. When I first came on board with the company and I say, oh yeah, I work with AJ Fernandez. They're like, oh, that's awesome. I love that H. Upman he did. I'm like, oh, that's great. Because they know the name, but they don't necessarily, some people don't quite understand that there's like the portfolio that we do for ourselves versus collaboration. So, also trying to get that message across to people as well.
It's an excellent point, and one thing that we've seen with a few manufacturers that have been incredibly successful with creating cigars for other companies and for other people. Plasencia is another good example that comes to mind.
Yes.
And then at some point they make that shift and try to, put their foot down on the gas pedal and truly go into next gear when it comes to their own portfolio and the cigars that have their name all over themselves.
And I think Plasencia did a very good job with that because, they took a name that we all in the industry knew, but consumers had, I would say a very, very small percentage of consumers knew the name Plasencia, and they made it into this I'm honestly very impressed with what they have done.
How would you say a company should attack that task at hand to get their own name out there more often, or to be more visible towards the end consumer? Or if I were to phrase it differently, like, where do you feel the biggest challenge lies for you and the entire AJ Fernandez team to continue thriving as a business and a company, but to put more emphasis and more focus on promoting the own name rather than cigars that are being made for other manufacturers or brand owners or people in the industry?
Well, and that is the $1 million question. AJ, again, as a name, people recognize it because people will say, oh, anything with AJ's name on it, I will, I smoke it. And that's great. And I think it's a layered thing. I think there's many different aspects to try to change that perception, because at this point, people already think a certain way. So it's kind of hard to roll that back and then be like, hey guys, I know that for the last however long you have been sort of treating it this way, but we actually need you to think differently. And I think just part of it too is just the exposure, you know, going to PCA and having our own booth and being able to connect with people. They're walking into the AJ booth and becoming aware that, oh, these are our brands, you know, these are the brands that we make as AJ Fernandez. That in turn, they can go back to their accounts and, you know, they're educating their staff who are educating customers and so on and so forth. Yes, right, to some degree that helps. You know, doing things like this, again, doing podcasts and interviews and talking about it. You know, and continuing to expand our sales force. You know, we're still trying to get more people, you know, boots on the ground to be able to fully cover everybody and kind of do it that way. But honestly, I think there's no overnight fix. And, you know, partly the way it's communicated too, because it's, without getting like into too much detail, you know, there's certain ways that, you know, the AJ name is communicated too with other brands that he makes as collaborations that I think, you know, can kind of further muddy the waters as well. And it's not that it's wrong. It's just that, you know, because they are, you know, everything is made by AJ, but I think it's just the way that we communicate to the retailers and the consumers. And, you know, between showing up to the stores, showing up to trade shows, doing, you know, educational things and social media stuff and, you know, shows over time, that will continue to kind of be understood, you know. And I think to some degree my experience with Macanudo was kind of like help prepare me for this, because, you know, when I came on board with them, Macanudo was really only known as Cafe, and Inspirato was just starting to hit the United States. And people really didn't know what Inspirato was. So we kind of had to change people's perception and say, hey, Macanudo isn't really what it used to be. And I mean, and that took years. So
What's interesting about this is that prior to your role with Macanudo, I mean, you really started to tip your toes into the cigar industry as a retailer. First. So you have a different pair of eyes looking at the industry and the interaction and the business relationship between the manufacturers and the retail community. So through the lens of a retailer, how do you think brands could better their engagement and could do a better job in approaching retailers and helping them to build up a brand, or for the brand to become successful?
You know, I think being consistent in showing up, and I mean, really, I don't want to keep harping on like, you know, the training education, but I think really if you can help forge that connection to the brand, you know, by being there, talking about your brands, even, you know, we're starting to open up factory tours, you know, obviously on a smaller scale, that's not going to be a huge thing, but, you know, getting people to come down and, you know, feel a real connection with, you know, Abdel and the AJ brand and everything. And again, I think it just comes with consistency. I think it comes with, you know, showing up, listening to consumers. You know, if we have every rep on, you know, on the ground going into retailers and everybody is saying the same thing about a need, you know, a gap in the portfolio. Oh, we need this is what would do well. And, you know, we can come back and say, hey, we listened. And, you know, we want to provide you with something that you think will help better you and our brand, and, you know, make it a symbiotic relationship. I mean, we need them and they need us, and why not try to work together? But yeah, just the consistency, listening, and, you know, being present in, you know, any questions, or being proactive about being able to bring them down to the factory or bring them to, you know, into a training session, something like that.
As strange as my question might sound, but how much of that do you think boils down to the actual cigar, or how much of the success in the relationship between the manufacturer and the retailer, and ultimately from the retailer to the end consumer, truly depends on just the cigar itself, and how much, on the other hand, is based on real estate and the way you manage the exposure on the retail shelf, how you
kickbacks, promotions,
the visibility,
yeah,
and even such things as, you know, just that personal relationship between a rep and the retailer. Because at the end of the day, we're all human beings, and we love to do business with people that we like and that we appreciate.
Of course, of
So
course.
where do you balance, or where do you find that balance in, you know, how much is really about the product? Because God knows there's plenty of wonderful cigars out there today, and And the world really doesn't need another cigar brand. Yet there's so many people trying to enter the industry anew, and old and tested brands trying to find a new alleyway.
You know, if I had to send you a cigar for every good question, you would have a full humidor. No, and that seriously is a great question, because I think they're ultimately, the product has to be good, because you can go in and, you know, show up with a smile on your face and bring donuts and coffee and run promos or spiffs and have great packaging and a great relationship. But at the end of the day, if that product does not sell, if they don't personally stand behind that product, I think a relationship can only go so far. Now, relationships in this industry, of course, are abundantly important. Like really any industry, yes, but like cigars in particular, very relationship driven. So that definitely gets you a long way. But yeah, you have to have a good product. I mean, for example, kind of harkening back to my retail days, we had a rep who worked for one company that we did really well for. And then he no longer worked for that company and went to work for a different company that we did not particularly care for. But you know, we liked him and we wanted to support him, and we said, you know, hey, that's cool, we'll bring in some of your stuff, we'll see how it goes. He was consistent, he came in, we still had a great relationship, we tried. At the end of the day, they didn't sell. And it's like, hey, you know, we like you and we want to support you, but like this is still a business, and like we still need to move this product. So I mean, yes, while the relationship and the all-encompassing, deal is, you know, with having that relationship with the retailers and anything else. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here. And but yes, at the end of the day, the product has to be good. And I think that's, at least, you know, we've got a good product to back us. So it makes it a little bit easier on our end. But yeah, it's a very good question.
Great point. And I keep saying that, you know, a great product without story is shallow.
Mm-hmm.
And a great story without the product to back it up is just a fluke, right?
Yeah.
When you have both, it's like the stars align and the magic can unfold. And I certainly believe that AJ Fernandez is in a great position to have both, to have great people working for them, great products to back it up, and an ever-growing legacy and reputation in the industry.
Well, thank you.
One thing that's also interesting is that the cigars that you were representing before and the portfolio of AJ Fernandez, I would consider fundamentally different.
Yes.
The smoking experience, and in essence, right? Everything that you do, how you communicate, the products that you enjoy, and how you bring that message across very much resonates with your personal enjoyment of the product, of course. And you mentioned it before, you have to love the product in order to communicate it properly. So how was that transition for you in terms of switching maybe your own smoking habits and the cigars that you were enjoying on a daily basis?
You know, it's funny because, you know, in my personal time, it's still, you know, I kind of maintain what I had smoked previously, but, you know, I have a love for just a lot of different styles. And, you know, and like you said, Macanudo and AJ are obviously two very different, fundamentally different brands. It's just, honestly, it's kind of nice to have a little bit of a switch up. I mean, I would say, you know, it's hard because it's like I don't want to get myself into hot water, because I always enjoyed, you know, Macanudo. And I mean, it was a brand that I stood behind 100%. But I would say, to my personal smoking preferences, you know, in my personal time, I would tend to gravitate more towards like, you know, the portfolio I'm working with now. So it's, you know, being able to go out and, you know, just be on a totally different brand. And it's like you get this whole new smoking revitalization. It's like, man, you know, you're trying to smoke everything still in your personal time, but you're spending so much time, you know, out on the road, events, trade shows, whatever it may be. So yeah, I mean, I really don't feel like I had to get used to it, or like, you know, I had to start eating meals before smoking cigars, though, because sometimes, you know, like a Ramon Alones, I know that's not something that you guys carry in the US because it's a Cuban heritage brand, but sorry, excuse me, in the European market we have in the US. And it is a little butt kicker because we're using media tiempo, For the wrapper, I mean, that is a little powerhouse. And sometimes I'm like, okay, well, I cannot smoke this on an empty stomach. And I am an avid smoker. So yeah, little things like that. But honestly, it's been fun. And it's like I said, regardless of I wouldn't want to go somewhere that I didn't support the product. It's just, this is just supporting a very different product, but it's cool.
Yeah. And since you already mentioned different profiles and different styles of cigars and characteristics that you have in the actual smoking experience, um, it it makes me think back to the point that we were discussing earlier, as to how do you build up the name of a brand, and how do you differentiate your own portfolio from a lot of the cigars that Abdel has been creating for other people and other companies. Where do you think your challenge as a company and as a brand lies in creating a portfolio that is cohesive and holistic in how it is built and how it is put together? Because I'm always curious about that aspect. There's brands out there that have 278 odd SKUs flying around, and at some point you just get lost in
Oh
that
yeah, it's so
overwhelming
much.
offer of product, especially with the all these limited editions coming on top of each other, and everybody's always curious what's new. So everybody's forced into releasing new limited edition after limited edition. But then how do you build that core portfolio that serves as the building blocks of this is who we are, this is our brand, and this is what we want to be recognized for, which is, I believe, ultimately the fundamental differentiating element of brand recognition and people appreciating who you are at the core.
Sure. And I'm going to answer that in just a second, but I want to bring up something you said, and that people always expect something new and you're forced to release something. And I actually had a conversation with somebody not that long ago, and they had asked, what came first? Did the industry create this monster, or did the industry respond to this? Because if competitively they're saying, hey, we're going to release this new thing to stay relevant and we want people to look at us, and then other manufacturers start doing it, and you start to train the consumers to expect that, or did the consumers say, or did manufacturers get comfortable with what we were releasing and consumers say, we want more? So I don't know. I always find that interesting. Like, which came first? Did we feed that demand? I think to some degree, yes. But it's releasing something, now to really answer your question, to release something to make sure that it fits with the portfolio, from us in particular, from Abdel, everything that he does for himself versus what he does for collaborations is going to be 100% him. So differentiating between our own brands and collaborations, he has total autonomy over something that he is doing for himself versus if he's doing something for somebody else, he his tobacco, his blending, obviously depending on the situation and the involvement, but to some degree there's still confines we have to work within, but when I'm blending them, when Abdel does the blends for portfolio, it is 100% to his likeness, and for us to maintain something cohesive, really how I would categorize it is something that is just like very predominantly Nicaraguan tobacco. We do a lot of puros, and really kind of, I think his goal is to, bring attention to this country that has so much wealth of tobacco, flavor diversity, climate diversity, and to put it into a cigar and say, hey, this is the heart of Nicaragua. So much of what we do, like I said, we have puros, we have multiple different puros, which I'm sure obviously but in case you don't, puro is that all components and the production is coming from the same country of origin. In this case, Nicaragua, we're very fortunate because Nicaragua is so diverse. I mean, you take the four major growing regions, Jalapa, Condega, Esteli, Ometepe, which is personally some of my favorite tobacco. And you can make this beautiful cigar that is just, it's so unique. And I think some of the detriment to a puro can be that it's a little flat, a little one-noted, because each country kind of has its own tobacco feel. Nicaragua is known for something a little bit more spicy, earthy, punchy. It has a distinct flavor to it. So sometimes, like wine, if you're getting blends, you want to blend grapes from different areas to some degree because you're bringing more of this balance. But AJ, his one of his many claims to fame is his ability to take a predominantly Nicaraguan cigar and make every one of them so different. So I guess to make a short answer long here, it would be that, it's very heavily Nicaraguan, and that it really highlights all of what the country has to offer, and AJ is all about balance. Anytime you talk to him about a blend, it doesn't matter if it's on the mellower end or on the stronger end, it's got to be clean and it's got to be balanced. And it also has a fair amount of Nicaraguan tobacco.
I love how you brought up the topic of that chicken and egg issue in the industry.
Sure.
Not that it's really an issue, but that topic of what was first, consumer demand or the manufacturer's reaction to it. And we could apply the same question and principle to what you were just saying in terms of how do you structure the portfolio. How much of the consumer feedback is actually taken into consideration when the entire team or Abdel just by himself conceptualize a new cigar, a new blend, a new line? Is it purely an expression of this is a tobacco that I want to work with, or you stumble in the most positive sense across this great blend, and the cigar just treats you well whenever you try it, and you say, well, this is something we have to do, and then you build everything around it in terms of the storytelling, the packaging, the design? Or do you very actively listen to what people are saying and the feedback that you're getting, especially for you with the boots on the ground and the finger on the pulse of the retailers and the consumers, as to, we're missing something here. Why don't we try to cater to a specific need or a void in the industry or in a retailer's humidor?
Sure. And it works both ways, because Abdel has his own process, and I don't know 100%, what his thought process is when he comes to a new blend, but I can tell you, for example, like Dorado. Dorado is something, it's a brand new field. Well, not brand new now, but our newest field. And the soil is very unique and distinct. And he blended the Dorado and then came to, marketing. This is before my time, but he went to marketing and said, hey, I have this blend, figure it out, make it work. And because of this new field and this sort of the golden appearance of the soil, the name Dorado. So Frankie, who's our main US guy here, he came up with the concept of the name Dorado to say, well, hey, we'll name it after the golden appearance of the soil. And so in that respect, it came blend. And then, it's a blend that he knew was fantastic and wanted to put it to market. So then, the marketing and the sales came behind that. As far as something like the New World Connecticut, that came at a time when, consumers were still liking something more in like a mellow realm. That was kind of to fill a gap in the portfolio, and it's a great blend, but it's something to make sure that we're offering something for everybody. So if there's enough people out and about who are saying, hey, we really think we should, we want something that's either mellow or full-bodied or spicy, or we think you should do this size, we really want a funky size, or we really want a Lancero, although truly I wish more people said they wanted Lanceros. Or we want something at a certain price point because there's a growing segment of people who want something, for a higher end cigar bar or whatever it may be. That is all stuff that we take into consideration. But at the end of the day, AJ has to want to do it, and he has to think it makes sense for the brand, and that it's something that he feels comfortable putting out, because it's his brand, it's his likeness, and he wants people to smoke what he thinks is a fantastic cigar and what he likes, because that's he's very good at what he does. And I think, it's easier for him to say, hey, I've made this really great cigar and I hope you all can get on board. And it seems like for the most part, people do.
We had some wonderful comments over on Facebook from Sarah Saunders, and she was saying that there seems to be a very short attention span on the consumer side, and that there is a plethora of new cigars, that people seem to get overwhelmed by, and also Ben
Oh, for
Wills
sure.
from Smokes made a great comment that she's often wondering why people don't try to get acquainted with blends for longer periods of times, and see how it hits your palate, how it affects your palate, and just give the cigar more time to
Yeah.
truly deliver something to you. Because we all know that enjoying one cigar could be a very, very limited and narrow experience, depending on the mood you're in that day, whether you had something odd to eat or drink beforehand, just the environment you're in, or maybe that one particular cigar wasn't performing well that day. And if you just write it off then and there, you might lose the opportunity to discover something you would truly love.
Yes. Like a
When
disappointing restaurant, I give it 3 chances.
100%, I couldn't agree more. Absolutely. It's a great analogy, right? And it's the exact same thing with cigars. And there seems to be a certain pressure on manufacturers' shoulders to feed that new trend where people are just raving about the latest limited edition and the latest new release.
Yeah.
Whereas you know another great point that just came to my mind yesterday, I was doing an interview with Ray on Instagram Live, Ray Pradanoff, who's here with us.
Sure.
Such a great guy, and we had a lovely conversation. And we spoke about the awards season and the top 25 lists coming up in just a couple of weeks, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even there, how do you balance that raving about the new and what were the most memorable cigar experience you had over the past 12 months, and mostly you would see a new release, a new something coming up, but never forget that there's great brands and blends out there that stood the test of time.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
that is such a challenge, to provide something that is consistent year after year after year. And has been a great cigar for the past 25 years, still a great cigar today, and hopefully it'll still be a great cigar in 10 years from now.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, with this demand that forces new product into the market, it's forcing old product out. And I think the ones that really people will consistently revisit, that would have withstood the test of time, will continue to do so. But I mean, how many companies are pushing out products that aren't selling, shelving them, and then, something akin to that is being brought up, down the line in 2 or 3 years, and people are saying, oh, it's great, it's new. And you're like, yeah, but this is like so similar to what was here. And it's just, I think it's the mentality. I honestly think part of it is, I don't want to say like a psychology thing, but I think there is the need to keep up with what's new. And there's all this, the cigar apps that you can post what you're smoking, and the ratings, like you said, award season. Also, yeah, I love that you called it award season, because it just always reminds, like Oscars, Grammys, that kind of thing. But and yeah, and people want to feel connected with, the new product. There's the great marketing, the social media that's pushing it out. It's in your face. You have to try it. But then, unless it's a really, really good, unique cigar, at some point that wanes and people will still go back to the old standbys. And you kind of have, I think, a category of cigars that just sort of keep churning and, becoming new down the line. So it's hard. Sometimes I just want to be like, but just, this has been on the market for 20 years for a reason, because it's really, really good. And it's great that people want to stay, with the relevant cigars of, the hour, the week, the year, whatever it may be. And, and obviously we have to feed that to some degree, but It's just, yeah, it's difficult sometimes because you really do want to just kind of bring attention to those things that are the good old standbys, but you can only fight it for so long.
Laurel, on that note, and again, thinking back to your retail days, do you think that there is a certain discrepancy between the end consumer's perception and preference, and I say this carefully, but the more nerdy industry insider point of view? And that includes the manufacturers, the bloggers, the reviewers, and people who, in all honesty, watch shows like ours,
Mm-hmm.
because it takes a certain amount of passion and industry involvement to, you know, sit down on a Wednesday evening or afternoon and listen for 90 odd minutes, with two people rambling on about the industry. So there's the regular consumer, and then there's the people who are more heavily involved with the industry. And sometimes I feel there's a bit of a gap between the two, where
There is. I think I agree
everything
with
we're
you.
talking about is, the stuff you read in magazines, and you read online in blogs, and you hear the reviewers raving about. But then you have the reality of what's actually happening in the market and what are people actually looking for.
Yes. And I think that's telling when you look at like, yearly sales to say, hey, we've got our old standby, like for us, the New World Oscuro is a monster. Like that is our number one selling cigar. The New World Oscuro Toro in the US kills it. We could release something new and fun and interesting or limited or whatever, and get good reception. But I think and if you look at it from like a micro lens, okay, yes, it's doing really, really well right now, this month or these 2 months or these 3 months, whatever. This has been a good quarter for this cigar. But if you look at it from like a macro perspective, I think the reality is, these do move on a larger scale. And like you said, the retailer knows what sells. They know what the reality is. I didn't see the whole comment, but I saw somebody say something about the 70-20 rule or 70-30 rule. What was it in the comment section? And I think that's true. Even if you look at like somebody's humidor, you go to like the standard retailer, they know what moves. We know what moves, but there is the interest for wanting something new all the time.
When you look at the industry in large, and when you look at some of these trends and what's happening in the market currently, on the one hand, I think we can all agree on the fact that the industry is in a good place. Sales have been very strong for the last couple of years, yet we're facing all sorts of issues, regulatory aspects aside for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
But just in terms of the manufacturing, supply and demand balance, a couple of weeks ago, we spoke with John Oliva and Trey Oliva about shortages in terms of tobacco and the issues they're having with El Nino and the tobacco growing
Sure.
in Ecuador, for example. So those are all things that will affect the industry further down the road, given how long it actually takes for the tobacco to grow, to be processed, to be rolled into cigars, aged, and then put on the market. But how do you look at those trends on a larger scale? And where do you think the industry is at right now and here towards the end of 2023?
In terms of just like overall, how healthy is the industry?
I think that's one aspect of it, but then also, maybe more specifically, when it comes to particular trends,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's the
Sure.
Vicolas that people
Yeah.
favor, or even certain tobaccos, and how do you see that reflected in your own portfolio of cigars? We all know, that there used to be a time when everybody was all about broadleaf, and
Of course.
you see broadleaf coming out of Honduras, and Nicaragua,
Yeah,
and the next thing then is Mexican San Andres before people
of
start
course.
rediscovering Candela. Just
Yeah.
out of my ass here.
Well,
You
back
get
in
my
my
point.
back in my retail days, but 60s, like 60 ring gauges were really, really big, literally and figuratively. And I remember coming in and being like, this is ridiculous. These are huge. They weren't like, they were already always they were already in existence before, I came in 2011, but that was something that was starting to really take hold. And then, came the wave of the 70s and the 80s and these massive ring gauges. And, for, I would say, a good 2 years, that was a good majority of what we were selling. People wanted the biggest cigar that we had. And I think, to some degree, it was a value thing. And I have personally seen that trend start to, go down a little bit, which I am here for. Not, I don't want to say like I'm not, whatever, I want everybody to be happy and thrive and get what they want and be successful with the products they're putting out. But like for me personally, that is just not my ring gauge. But I've seen firsthand, less and less people, I think, really going crazy over these, these supersized cigars, these crazy, the larger ring gauge cigars. And you see it with tobacco country of origins. I mean, even Nicaragua, I would say that Nicaragua has been booming for quite some time. I think back in like the boom in the 90s, the Dominican Republic really had a stronghold on the industry. You look at like the Fuentes, JC Newman, right? And you're kind of at this time where Dominican tobacco seemingly was kind of the dominating country. But then, with AJ and Drew Estate and Rocky or whoever else it may be, they're coming in, and really they made Nicaragua big. And Nicaragua, I think, as a tobacco country of origin, really isn't a trend anymore. I think it's here to kind of stay as sort of like the, really the consistent powerhouse of tobacco. Not saying that, Dominican and Honduran tobacco isn't contributing. Obviously, that's still very relevant. But, if you look at something like you mentioned San Andreas, or I think about Brazilian tobacco, I think Brazilian tobacco hit a big trend like 3 or 4 years ago. And I can tell you, from my former company, we were leaning into that. You saw a lot of other companies leaning into Brazilian tobacco. And I think, Matafina, Braganza, Arparaca, whatever it may be. Look, I love Brazilian tobacco, but I think it's not something maybe necessarily the popularity of it is sustainable in the long run, like something like Nicaragua as a country for cigars is. But yeah, I mean, I think people, if we're talking about sizes, Toro rules them all. I know it's probably different in the international market, but for the US market, I think if the industry had to come together and agree upon one size forever, it would be Toro. And, I personally think like a Corona is sort of the sweet spot for the ratio of wrapper to binder to filler. I love more traditional Cubanesque sizes like Lonsdale's. I love a Lancero, but I talk too much to smoke a Lancero. That always goes out on me. So you definitely see the trends in the tobaccos, in the sizes. There's companies who are putting out, I think about Drew Estate in particular, and them as a company, they're always just like sort of against the grain. So they have like the egg and the one that's like the triple wrapped one. So they always come out with those funky sizes. But, I think from my perspective, and I could be totally off base here, it seems to be kind of leveling out to just back to more traditional sizing. And I think people are more open to trying different blends. I feel like we got to a point in, at least my time in the industry, where everybody wanted something really, really strong. Like everybody just wanted something to punch them in the face. and I always thought that was like doing so many great cigars a disservice. I think there's this kind of common misconception that as you move through your cigar smoking career, as you start from a novice to, a pro, that the expectation is that you end on something full bodied. You always have to smoke these really crazy full bodied cigars. And I think we're kind of shifting our perception back to, hey, there's some really great mellow cigars. And, I've seen a lot more limited editions coming out that kind of are more in that mellow range or medium bodied. And I think we're starting to open up our palates more to kind of going back to a little bit of everything. But yeah, I felt like there was a point there where it was just everything had to be crazy strong. And sometimes I don't always want, a 9 out of 10 strength cigar at, 6 a.m. with a cup of tea.
And to be honest, Laurel, I love what I'm hearing, and I'm completely with you. I firmly believe it takes a more experienced palate to appreciate the more subtle nuances
100%.
and the
100%.
delicacies in the
Yes.
cigar. and forgive me please for saying that, but it's comparatively easy to make a cigar that hits you in the face and that just hammers on that one note, and it gives you a very upfront sensation. It's just brimming with energy and strength, and but maybe that's all the cigar will give you, and it will keep on hammering that one note all the way to the end. Whereas to listen to those fine tunes and a little bit of a flute here and there, and the delicate string underneath,
Yes.
and some brass on top of it, that takes a more subtle and nuanced way of blending. And on the recipient's end, it requires quite a bit of experience, I guess, or looking for the harmony and that subtlety rather than just impact and strength up front.
You are unequivocally correct, because I think, for mellow cigars, people start on them inherently because it's like, oh, something that's approachable. But I totally am in agreement with you that once people get to a certain point in they've kind of expanded their palate, and they know what they're looking for, and you can sort of open your mind and your full palate to the intricacies, you appreciate more of what that has to offer. Maybe if you started smoking in 2023, that, like for me, I love the San Latano Connecticut. I think the San Latano Connecticut is a beautiful example of something being mellow, but very, very intricate. I think if maybe a newer cigar smoker would smoke that, it's like, okay, it's flavorful, it's enjoyable, it's mellow, but like, it's a cigar. And then they kind of work their way up, and once they have refined themselves, I don't want to say refined themselves like I'm being snooty, but you know what I mean. Once you've become refined, you can revisit that and really appreciate those intricacies more. But I think, at least, again, our consumer trends are different. At least for here, I think there was kind of that people got stuck. They just got stuck on that really, really powerhouse cigar and didn't want to go back because they felt like they were backsliding. But I think with the introduction of some of these really nice, delicate, mellower blends, it's almost a testament to your palate and your seasoned cigar smoking ability to pull out all of the little subtleties that something mellower has to offer.
Interesting point here. And I know you've been with AJ Fernandez for a certain length of time now, but maybe just as a consumer, do you also see such, I dare call it an evolution, but a change in the way that Abdel has been blending his cigars and creating his cigars? Because I just thought about that analogy, and Sarah Saunders posted something about a chef's analogy over on Facebook as well. It made me think of my own journey as a bartender and as an experience creator. I think in the beginning you have to learn your basics. You get to know your raw materials, you get to know your ingredients, and you start to learn how to make a great stock, a great sauce, simple basic things. Then you go all crazy and bonkers, and you start to do these infusions and those macerations and all the crazy technique, and you start to fat wash tequila with foie gras fat and you name it. And then at some point you reach a certain level of maturity in your creative evolution, where you suddenly realize less is more, and you go back to those core fundamentals, to the basics, and you realize that only taking 2-3 great ingredients and to truly bring out the very best in them is the mastery of the art. Do you see that evolution or a similar change in the way Abdel has been approaching his blending and cigar creation?
Now, to be clear, I am not sure on his process over the years. So I just want to, throw that out there, that this is speaking kind of purely from an outside speculation. If you look at like the New World line, and the New World line is like pretty predominantly Nicaraguan tobacco. Within it, there are 3 puros, the Puro Especial, the Oscuro, as well as now the Dorado. And the New World line started really hitting it back in like 2014. And since then, we have released other blends like the Beas Artes, the Beas Artes Maduro, which is actually one of my personal favorites. It uses actually a Brazilian Matafina for the wrapper. Beautiful cigar, tastes like dark chocolate. It's amazing. And both the Habano and the Maduro are very unique and intricate, and they're kind of tapping into different tobaccos. But at the end of the day, New World is still our champion, and those Nicaraguan puros that blending style that Abdel does for New World, then we've subsequently released the Dorado, bringing it back to that. So I'm not sure if that's the rationale. Like I said, I want to be very honest with that, but seeing what we released first and then kind of some releases in between and then kind of what we've gone back to focus on, to me says, there's kind of a formula to, what he likes, what works, what kind of that sweet spot is.
Great point. And again, I mentioned it earlier, and this is really something I was curious about your perception as a consumer retail experience and working with the brand, of course, but very interesting to hear. And it's definitely something that I'm always curious to see when I observe the evolution of a brand over time, and when you see in their portfolio certain keynotes that the manufacturers and blenders are hitting. So I love that. And I think for a consumer, it's also beautiful to kind of follow along on that journey and to become part of that creative journey of a manufacturer and blender even.
Yeah, and from a retailer perspective or just a consumer's perspective from other companies, I could say that there are other manufacturers I see out there where, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, they were trying something totally crazy, like totally out of the realm of what they are known for. And some of it worked and some of it, meh, and then I think now I'm, kind of, again, going back to that conversation of seeing this trend kind of come back to, maybe, I don't want to say back to the basics, but I think there was a moment where everybody they tried the different things, they tried to step out of their comfort zone, but it's hard to buck brand perception too. If you look at a company like Davidoff, right, and they're known for, their white label, their, creamy, flavorful, mellower cigars, you have a whole, and obviously they continue to innovate because they want to stay up with market trends. But you have solidified yourself as a company that really does these beautiful, intricate, mellower blends. And I think sometimes if you try to come out with something like, totally crazy, people are like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, what are you trying to do? Like, this is not what we expect from this company. And, and I think they do a good job of, trying to make sure everybody is getting what they want. And again, you're not kind of staying in step with what consumers are looking for. But yeah, I've seen a lot of companies over the last couple of years where you see these limited releases, but they're like limited releases of blends that they've had success with in the past, or, an anniversary blend of something they've had success with in the past. So, I think as an industry, it's easy, kind of, I don't want to say it's easy to say, but, you can kind of look at it as a whole, my goodness, and say we're kind of getting back to, what we know people are looking for and what works for us.
I wanted to bring in Albert because I saw he posted a lot of great questions in the comments. I just want to throw one more question at you, because I'm pretty sure, knowing Albert, that he will have a perspective and an opinion on this as well.
Okay.
Talking about communication and marketing and trends on a macro level. We live in a crazy world, no question, right? The arrival or the growth of AI has taken everybody by storm. We saw that the industry has changed dramatically through social media, new ways of communicating, and the cigar industry is so beautifully stubborn, old-fashioned in a lot of its ways, and it's part of why I love it so much, because it's still real, honest, face-to-face, handmade. It's all about the analog experience, and in today's world, I think that analog is the new luxury. But how do you think that the industry is moving along, keeping its roots whilst also applying some of those new ways of communicating and adapting to what's happening in the world outside and at large.
I think that your point is spot on when you say analog is a new luxury, and I think you're never going to be able to take away the in-person experience that the cigar community provides. And I really think that COVID showed that, because I was doing Facebook lives and Instagram lives, and everyone was like doing different podcasts and shows and stuff. But once it opened back up, once the floodgates were open for people to go back and be in person, I don't really think there was a loss of that interest because of it. But I think the technology we have now, and I don't know, to speak to AI specifically, I'm not really sure yet how that is going to be sort of incorporated into everything. But, as far as like social media, in fact, I had a conversation with somebody just a few weeks ago, and they were talking about how, he started a TikTok page and he's big on TikTok. I'm like, really? TikTok for cigars? Like, that's it just, and maybe I'm not looking at it from a fresh perspective, but I'm thinking in my mind, I'm like, are these like cigar guys really sitting around, lounges going on TikTok? But apparently, and I think we have the ability to communicate on such a large scope at our fingertips. Look at this. How many people from literally around the world are being able to communicate this way? And I think that just does the industry as a whole a major service, because you're able to stay connected that way. So I definitely think, the technology and the media aspect it can be a blessing and a curse, to be honest, I think. But from a connection standpoint, it's wonderful to be able to do this and to use those tools to our advantage. But yes, at the end of the day, if it comes down to it, an in-person event is always going to be, preferred to a virtual event, and doing an in-person interview is going to be preferred to doing a virtual interview. And and I love and appreciate that. I think people are still craving that in-person human interaction, because this is just something that isn't as fun to do by yourself.
Yes, very true.
So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that we really do have. Okay.
Laura, that's amazing question, to be honest. By the way, thank you for joining us and finding time, in your busy schedule. AJ Fernandez, representative on this channel. That is as good as it gets. I have only two questions. I have a lot of questions, but obviously time is limited. So,
Ask away.
my first question. Yeah, well, first question is actually, let's talk underdogs. So,
okay.
Every brand, develops a product. And that product, you look from a money perspectives, consumers, surveys, you name it. And then you release the product and it really doesn't hit the sales, numbers. And you're like, oh my God, it's not hitting sales numbers. But then, it actually takes off. So as a takeaway from this kind of meeting, we all now have an opportunity to go and, buy AJ Fernandez cigar. And I would love to know, what was that cigar that was undervalued, by consumers, but then it took off, and it was, expectedly you want to, sell it well, and that's what you expected, and it did not, but actually it took off.
That's a very good question. I would say as a line, when I don't know. I'm trying to think of something that, really like started and people maybe weren't expecting it to do well on its own and take off. I would say, honestly, I think when New World came out, it was on the heels of San Latano, and San Latano was AJ's first foray into his own company. And it was doing well, but when New World came out, it was something different, and it was something kind of unexpected. And I wasn't on this side with AJ when that happened, but New World went on to become very quickly, and still now are runaway. That is the major brand for us. And, you know, I think at the time, you know, coming in with this bold Nicaraguan Puro was like, okay, well, you know, what is this going to do in the market? And then honestly, it did really well, and it brought the rest of the brand with us. I mean, even the Dorado, we just released that about a year ago, another Nicaraguan Puro, and still doing fantastic for us. You know, my kind of underdog that I think of is actually what I'm smoking right now, which is the Diaz de Gloria. So the Diaz de Gloria is a cigar that, at least in the US, I don't think gets the love and recognition that it needs, because it's truly a phenomenal cigar, and it's one of my favorite in the portfolio. And I find it to be very Cuban-esque. And I know everybody has kind of a different opinion on what Cuban-esque means, but, you know, this to me is just, it's so intricate, and it's so, you know, interesting and complex. And, you know, I feel like every puff just kind of gives you something different. And once you get somebody on it, they're like, oh my gosh, that's an amazing cigar. But it's hard for people to reach for the Diaz de Gloria. So for me, that is the underdog of, hey, you know, this is a phenomenal cigar that we sell that, you know, maybe people aren't giving enough credit to because they just don't really know what it is and they're not reaching for it.
That's a great answer. So yeah, you know, gonna go and grab, you know, a couple of those, you know, favorite cigars of yours. And, you know, I like to be surprised. And going back to, you know, it's not a question, but, you know, just to emphasize on that 70-20-10 rule. So, you know, it's just been proven by, you know, statistics, and numbers don't lie usually. So that 70% of cigars and, you know, any products people, you know, buy that they trust. It's based on trust. They tried it, they tested, it's trusted, they buying it. Around 20% of products, including cigars, it's really, you know, advertising and influence related cigars. So, you know, it's basically, we saw an advertisement or their friends suggested. So about 20% is that what they buy. And the 10% is really, you know, it's a spur of moment. They came into the lounge, they haven't tried it, you know, they didn't want to look stupid in the lounge while they're looking at everything. Is like, okay, I'm gonna pick that cigar. So I mean that to explain that formula. But my second question is actually very simple.
Okay.
You know, everybody in the industry has nicknames. What's yours?
What's my nickname? I don't know. I don't know if I have a formal nickname. So I used to have I used to have bangs, like pretty severe bangs, like they were very straight, precise, very distinct, and it was like my signature look for a while. And it was so tedious because I mean, literally, like, to keep that maintenance to make them look like that, I was fussing around with them like every week. And being on the road as much as I am, I was like, this is so stupid, I'm growing them out. And people were like, where are your bangs? What happened to them? And they would call me Bangs. They'd be like, oh, hey, Bangs. So I guess, I don't know. I think that's kind of a silly nickname. But as far as nicknames go, I would say that's the one I've been called most.
That's a good nickname, you know. Cigar has a band as well.
Yeah, I don't
Just,
know. So no, it's that lovely cigar lady. That's what everybody calls me.
I mean, well,
Obviously.
well, sooner or later, you're gonna get, you know, a formal nickname. That's just what the industry is all about. You know, cigar industry likes to personalize things, like not any other industry in comparison.
Yeah.
So that's one. Just Reinhard, on that AI, you know, thing. So I mean, I'm avid AI user, and couple of things that, you know, when people think AI, we think about creative or creative AI. But you know, AI, there's a category, there is a specific category called generative AI. It generates things. You tell them what to do and it just generates. So one of the things that, you know, cigar brands can massively, you know, incorporate is the real-time language translation. So you're doing a video and immediately translates, real-time translates your language. It's already, you know, there. It's already existing. Whole, you know, a couple of apps actually on industry, you know, available online. So, you know, generative AI, I think, gonna elevate every industry that actually will be willing to tap into it. I mean, people would be willing to research, you know, their capabilities that they do exist. So
Yeah,
that's
that's a
my
great
opinion.
resource. That's a great resource. Yeah. I was
Well,
actually
no. No more questions from my side.
Oh, no, no, you're good.
I want to take care, that, take in consideration, that, we are under time constraint.
No, I appreciate that. And thank you. And thank you for being here. If you have any more questions, feel free to ask. I really haven't, I'm not like an early adopter of technology. And AI for me it's just, I think it's so unknown, and I really don't, I mean, even what you're telling me right now, like that use case, unfamiliar to me. And I was talking to somebody from another manufacturer about press releases, and he was like, oh yeah, it's so easy. You can use AI for press releases. And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah. Just, give me some parameters, make up a fake cigar, fake release date, whatever. Give me all this, this fake information. And I read the article. I was like, this is amazing. Like, when you talk about AI, I guess it is artificial intelligence is, the key, because it's tapping into, all the publications about agents. I was like, how does it know this? Like, how does it know these details? Like, it really is crazy, but it could be a great
Oh yeah.
resource.
Oh yeah, I mean, companies needs to tap more and more. So, like copywriting, that's an easy one. The another one aspect, for example, especially when you are on a flight taking photos. So, like a new Photoshop version as of 4 years ago, it has a better, feature where you can select area, you type in what you want it to be changed into, and it changes, and it's flawless.
Wow.
So removing things, adding things, it's crazy. Unfortunate, there are some limitations when it comes down to tobacco smoking. It does not not all apps generates actually, a cigar or cigarette or whatever, you ask them to, AI to generate.
Sure.
But that's policy related. So yeah.
Yeah.
Albert,
And I sorry,
thoughts?
go ahead. I'm done.
No, please. No.
Nope, I'm good.
I just wanted to say thank you to Albert for his questions and his thoughts, in particular to AI. I think it'll be very interesting to see over the next couple of months and years how that'll slowly creep into the cigar industry as well, and what some of the applications could be to serve the industry and help us all in our efforts to communicate better or to take the industry to the next level. Laurel, you made me think of something else when you brought up that band story and that nickname, which I find hilarious, by the way. With brands and products, you always have the issue of how much is linked to the actual person behind it. How much do you buy into the founder, the creator, the lady or the man with the vision and the dream behind it? And how do you manage to, regardless of all of that, build a brand that is strong enough to live just by itself and become its own thing? And the reason I'm asking this is quite many of the cigar brands in our industry heavily depend on that one person, that one icon. And if you think about, all the cigars in the humidor, most of them actually carry the name of either the founder or the family that created the cigars in the first place. And very few manage to shift into creating a brand that is self-sustainable. How do you think about that, particularly in regards to your own role with AJ Fernandez and the contribution that you can make towards the brand in order to build a strong foundation and a strong core that still relates to Abdel and the people behind it, but also is viable as its own organism, if that makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And to kind of answer your first question of how important is it, I think it is important. I think it's telling that you had mentioned that almost every, a good majority of brands out there are attached to a particular name. People like to feel that connection. And I think, in the cigar industry in particular, it's so heavy on, family tradition. I mean, you look at how many manufacturers out there, you're looking at, second, third, fourth generation people involved in that company. And I think the name and that person does carry a lot of weight. People are obsessed with AJ. They think he's just awesome. He solidified himself as this amazing blender and, a little bit of an enigma, to be honest, because he really, he thrives in the fields and in the factories. He wants to be in the, in it, in everything. I always joke that there's not enough hours in the day for him to get everything done. I'm like, what he does in a day is just overwhelming. Like, I think I would wake up every day and just have, a bout of anxiety, because he is part of everything, so, and I think, translating that in his brand with the name, people still feel that connection to him. They can see him on social media. He's at the trade show. He does do a few events, because that is really important. And for me, it's always like, I'm not AJ. I'm never going to be AJ. AJ is, he's the guy, and so, for me, really in my role, it's going and still bringing attention to him and the brand. It's, at the end of the day, if they have a choice between me and AJ, it's always going to be AJ, because who doesn't, want to hang out with him? But for my role to be able to kind of operate as an extension of, attending events and doing, PR and media stuff like this, that helps still connect people with AJ and his brand while still, maintaining that he's the guy, because it is important. And, and I think in the cigars that we do, both in portfolio and collaborations, with the AJ name, that still does carry weight to the connection back to him as a person, because he is still reachable. People can comment on his posts and, he'll respond. People can see him at the trade show. They can see him at some events. And so, that connection is still forged between him and those consumers. And, I kind of sort of try to work as a liaison to make sure that, he obviously, he is the blender. He's the main guy. I remember originally when I first started here, somebody asked me if I go down to the factory and help blend. I'm like, no, absolutely not. Like, why would you want me coming in and blending your cigars? That is not my forte. I can talk your ear off and I can tell you everything you want to know about the cigars. But as far as the blending and, the real business aspect of it, that is, he's very highly regarded in that respect, because he really does do a good job, and he really has built his name, with the AJ Fernandez company to hold weight on its own, even if he doesn't have the opportunity to, be here all the time connecting with consumers on his own.
Beautiful. What a wonderful thought, and what a wonderful answer. And it brings me full circle back to where we started our conversation. And I would love to end our chats on a more personal note, because
Sure.
you were speaking about your contribution and the value that you're bringing to the brand. If you think about it on a larger level, though, with your experience in retail, with Macanudo, now AJ Fernandez, but just in general, your impact on the cigar industry, what is the contribution that you would like to see grow and flourish in regards to your work, and where do you think that Laurel Tilley can make a difference in the cigar world?
It's so funny that you say that, because I feel like for so long of, in my career, not just specifically here, but in the cigar industry in general, I've always felt like I kind of had imposter syndrome. Like, why am I here? Do people really care? Like, do they even like me? And I was doing an event in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and we were doing a fuma tasting, a big to-do. There were like 60 people, and there was a woman who came up to me, my age, I'm only in my early 30s. And you see a lot of, women in the industry, like Cynthia Fuente, she, I think, really paved a way for a lot of women in the industry too, and just, showing them that they can be included. But I never really thought much about my contribution other than, just doing my job, showing up, working with reps, running events, talking about the brand. Right. And she came up to me and she's like, hey, I really want to thank you for being here. we weren't originally going to come tonight. She said, I have a book club with a couple other women, and we all smoke cigars. And, we came in and saw your face on a poster about the seminar. And we were so intrigued because I haven't seen another, woman our age come in and, run the event or run the room or, do this educational presentation. And she's like, and it was really meaningful seeing you here, because it feels like, we have representation in the industry. And I never really thought about that so much. And, it's such a touchy subject sometimes, because, I get asked a lot, like, oh, what's it like to be a woman in the industry? I'm like, fine, but sometimes not fine, kind of depending on the situation. But I just always kind of saw myself as a cigar smoker, not as like, a person who is trying to make a certain way or, make people feel comfortable in being included in these events and in their representation. But, if I could have an impact, on a macro level, it's just, even if it's just making women my age or any age feel more comfortable, doing these 101 events, being able to watch like little tutorial videos or whatever it may be, just, being able to have some minor impact on somebody, making them feel like they belong in this industry, to me is very meaningful.
Beautiful. I couldn't think of a better last sentence and a better way to conclude our session. Laurel, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us again, for everything that you shared with us today. As always, it was a breath of fresh air and an absolute delight to have you join us. Thank you so much for everything that you do, for all the hard work, for your effort, for your honesty, and for just being an exceptional ambassador to the cigar industry at large, and not just AJ Fernandez. So kudos to you, and keep up the amazing work, really.
Thank you. Seriously, this was so fun. I was really looking forward to this. And, it's always like so lovely to connect with people who just, I always feel so comfortable with you, and all the guests here are so wonderful. And I think that's just a testament to our industry and to you and what you've built. And seriously, like, thank you so much. And really, I'm not trying to harp on it, but you ask such good questions. So it's really refreshing too, to feel like, you have this kind of deep dive into things that maybe people don't get the opportunity to ask or listen to, or, for me to even talk about sometimes. So, thank you, truly. On the right as Thanksgiving comes tomorrow, I am thankful for you and all of you and the opportunity to be here.
Thank you so much, Laurel. That means a lot, and the feeling is 100% mutual. So yeah, I'm honored. Thank you, and I very, very much hope that you can join us again on December 20th. It's our annual Light 'em Up Cigar Family Christmas.
Absolutely.
You've been part of it, and I hope that we will have all the family back together. So please consider it an open invitation, and the most heartfelt one. So I hope to see you again in about a month from now.
Yes, absolutely. Hopefully it won't be as cold outside.
At least we'll all have our Christmas jumpers. So
yes, I have my ugly sweater ready.
Beautiful. Bring it up. Laurel Tilley, thank you so much for joining us at the Light 'em Up Lounge, and many, many thanks again. It's been fabulous.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for today. Another great show, another great episode. Please have a lovely, lovely Thanksgiving tomorrow. Our blessing and regards to all of you. Thank you all for your continued support, for your love, for your care, for your interest. And we'll see you all next week. Same time, same station with Robert Click. Until then, you be safe and be well. Bye. Goodbye, everybody. Cheers.
Thanks, Reinhard. Great show. Thanks, Laurel.